This story contains vivid descriptions of a distressing, apocalyptic scenario. Listener discretion is advised. It was the silence that woke Michael. Not the gentle hum of the refrigerator, not the distant drone of traffic, not even the soft whir of his bedside fan. Just nothing. A profound, absolute quiet that pressed in on him, heavy and unnatural. He blinked, pushing away the last tendrils of a dream he couldn't quite recall, and reached for his phone on the nightstand. His fingers brushed against cold, unresponsive glass. The screen, usually a faint glow, was utterly black. He frowned, a ripple of unease starting in his gut. Probably just died in the night, he thought, a familiar annoyance. But then he glanced at his digital alarm clock. Dead. Not just dim, but completely blank. The little red numbers that usually mocked him with the pre-dawn hour were gone. He sat up, pushing back the covers, and instinctively reached for the light switch beside his bed. Click. Nothing. He tried it again, flicking it up and down, a growing sense of dread tightening in his chest. Darkness. Complete, suffocating darkness. His heart began to pound. This wasn't just a dead phone or a trip breaker. Every appliance, every light, everything that should have been connected to power was dead. He fumbled his way out of bed, his bare feet meeting the cold hardwood floor, and moved towards the window. He pulled back the heavy curtains, expecting to see the faint orange glow of streetlights or the distant shimmer of the city skyline. What greeted him instead stole the breath from his lungs. The world outside was a canvas of impossible black. Not the soft, familiar darkness of a moonless night in the suburbs, but something deeper, more ancient. The stars, usually a smattering of pinpricks struggling against urban light pollution, were now blazing, a dazzling, terrifying tapestry that stretched across the sky with an intensity he'd only ever seen in pictures from remote deserts. There was no light anywhere. No neighbor's porch light, no distant car headlights sweeping across the trees, no faint glow from the town center. Nothing. Just the overwhelming, infinite black, punctuated by a billion indifferent stars. A cold, clammy fear wrapped around him. This wasn't a local outage. This was something else entirely. He stumbled to the hallway, his hands outstretched, bumping into furniture in the unfamiliar gloom. His wife, Jessica, was usually a light sleeper. Maybe she was already up trying to figure this out. "Jess," he called out, his voice hoarse, swallowed by the oppressive silence. No answer. He felt his way to her side of the bed. Empty. The sheets were cold. A fresh wave of panic hit him. Where was she? He tried the living room, the kitchen. Each room was a cavern of impenetrable darkness, cold and still. "Jessica!" he shouted, louder this time, his voice cracking with fear. Still nothing. Just the echo of his own desperation. He grabbed his old battery-powered flashlight from the junk drawer. A relic he hadn't touched in years. He flicked it on. A weak yellow beam cut through the darkness, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air, but doing little to dispel the profound sense of isolation. He checked the garage. Jessica's car was gone. His own car was still there, a dark, silent hulk. He tried the ignition. Nothing. Not even a click. The dashboard remained a blank slate. No power. Not even the battery. This was beyond comprehension. He had to find out what was happening. He had to find Jessica. Stepping out onto his porch, the crisp night air hit him sharp and cold. The silence was even more profound outside. No crickets, no distant dog barks, no faint hum of the electrical grid that was always there, an unseen presence. It was as if the world had simply stopped breathing. The houses around him were dark, hulking shadows against the starlit sky. No lights in his neighbor David's house. No light in Emily's across the street. He walked down his driveway, the gravel crunching loudly under his feet in the preternatural quiet. He reached the street. Parked cars lined the curb, but they were all dark, silent. He tried his car radio, twisting the dial. Static. Just static, then nothing. He tried his cell phone again. No service. Not even an emergency call. Not even a flicker of life. This wasn't just a power outage. This was a complete systemic collapse. He started walking, his flashlight beam swinging wildly, a tiny circle of defiance against the overwhelming black. He walked past David's house, knocked on the door. No answer. He tried the doorbell, a futile gesture, knowing it wouldn't work. He peered into the windows, seeing only his own terrified reflection staring back from the inky depths of the interior. The house felt empty. Not just dark, but empty. He moved to Emily's house. Same thing. Dark, silent, seemingly deserted. A cold dread seeped into him, chilling him to the bone. Where was everyone? And why was he the only one left? He continued down the street, his pace quickening. He had to get to the main road, to the gas station, to anywhere he might find answers or at least another living soul. The silence was maddening, punctuated only by his own ragged breathing and the frantic pounding of his heart. Every shadow seemed to writhe. Every rustle of leaves in the unseen trees sounded like a threat. As he reached the end of his street, the sight that met him brought him to a dead stop. The main road, usually a bustling artery even at this hour with late-night commuters or early risers, was a frozen tableau of chaos. Cars stood abandoned in the middle of the road, doors ajar, some with their headlights on but now dark like vacant eyes. A grocery cart lay on its side near the entrance to the market. A child's bicycle was sprawled across the sidewalk, its wheels still. There were no bodies, no signs of struggle, no blood, no wreckage from collisions, just absence. It was as if everyone had simply vanished. One moment they were there, living their lives, driving, shopping, walking. The next, they were gone, leaving behind only the ghosts of their routines. His flashlight beam swept over the scene, illuminating a half-eaten hot dog lying on the asphalt next to an open car door. A woman's purse sat on the passenger seat of another, its contents spilled across the leather. These weren't signs of an evacuation. This was an instantaneous, inexplicable disappearance. He felt a scream building in his throat, but it never escaped. His mind raced, desperate for an explanation. Nuclear war? An EMP? An alien invasion? But none of it made sense. No explosions, no warning signs, no visible cause. Just gone. The entire world seemingly emptied, leaving him alone in the profound, terrifying silence. He was standing in the middle of a global graveyard, a silent monument to a vanished humanity. And the most terrifying question of all echoed in the vast emptiness of the world. Why him? Why was he still here? Why was he the last one? The question was a physical weight, pressing down on him, stealing the air from his lungs. He stumbled back from the window, his breath catching in ragged gasps. This couldn't be real. It was a dream, a nightmare, a cruel hallucination brought on by the sudden terrifying silence. He squeezed his eyes shut, willing himself to wake up, to hear the familiar rumble of traffic, the distant wail of a siren, the faint murmur of human existence. He opened them again. The silence remained, a vast, oppressive blanket. Panic, cold and sharp, began to claw at his insides. He had to check. He had to be wrong. He rushed to his apartment door, fumbling with the lock, his hands trembling so violently he almost dropped the keys. He flung the door open, the sound echoing unnaturally loud in the stairwell. "Hello," he called out, his voice hoarse, barely a whisper. "Is anyone there?" Silence. Only the faint creak of the building settling, a sound he'd never noticed before. He took a tentative step into the hallway, then another. He walked past Jessica and David's apartment, their welcome mat still cheerfully proclaiming a greeting to a world that was no longer there. He knocked, first gently, then harder, his fist pounding against the solid wood. "Jessica? David? Are you home?" Nothing. He tried the handle. Unlocked. A jolt of unease, then a surge of desperate hope. Maybe they were just sleeping in. He pushed the door open slowly, peering into the familiar, yet now alien space. The living room was neat, a magazine lying open on the coffee table, a half-empty mug next to it, a faint scent of coffee lingering in the air. Their coats were hanging on the rack by the door. Everything was exactly as it should be, except for one critical detail. Jessica and David were gone, not ransacked, not disturbed, just empty, as if they had simply stepped out for a moment, never to return. He moved through their apartment, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. The bedroom was untouched, the bed made. The bathroom, a damp towel draped over the shower curtain rod. It was a snapshot of normal life, frozen in an instant, forever incomplete. This wasn't a robbery. This wasn't a struggle. This was something far more insidious. He backed out, pulling the door shut behind him, the click of the latch sounding like a gunshot in the stillness. He tried Emily's apartment across the hall. The same result. Unlocked door, a perfectly normal interior, a faint smell of a recently cooked meal, a book face down on the sofa, as if she just set it aside for a moment. But no Emily. A cold dread began to replace the panic. This wasn't just his building. This wasn't just his street. The scale of the absence was starting to register, a horrifying realization that threatened to shatter his sanity. He descended the stairs, taking them two at a time, his feet thudding on the carpeted steps. Each floor, each apartment door told the same silent, terrifying story. Open, undisturbed, empty. He reached the ground floor lobby. The glass doors, usually bustling with residents heading out for work or walking their dogs, reflected only the desolate street outside. The mailboxes were full, flyers peeking out. Michael rushed to the main entrance, pushing the heavy glass doors open, stepping out onto the sidewalk. The street. His street. It was exactly as he'd seen it from his window, but now, standing amidst it, the reality was even more profound, more chilling. The cars, an endless river of metal usually choked with morning commuters, were scattered haphazardly. Some were parked perfectly at the curb, others angled oddly in the middle of the road, as if their drivers had simply vanished mid-turn. A delivery truck, its back door slightly ajar, sat abandoned, its engine off, its goods still inside. A bicycle lay on its side near a bus stop bench, a single glove resting beside it. No broken windows, no fires, no signs of struggle, no bodies, just nothing. Michael walked into the middle of the street, his eyes scanning the deserted expanse. The traffic lights at the intersection still changed, mindlessly cycling through green, yellow, red, for an audience that no longer existed. The wind rustled through the leaves of the oak trees lining the street, the only sound breaking the absolute silence. He pulled out his phone again, though he knew it was futile. The screen glowed, mocking him with its no service message. He tried to dial 911. Nothing. He tried his parents' number, his best friend Mark's. Each call met with the same dead silence, the automated voice informing him that the call could not be completed. The cell towers were down. The landlines were dead. The entire communication network of the modern world had simply ceased to function. He started walking, his pace quickening, a desperate need to find something, anything. He passed a small coffee shop he frequented. Its door was unlocked. Inside, a half-prepared espresso sat under the machine, a perfectly swirled latte art waiting for a customer who would never arrive. The cash register was open, a handful of bills scattered inside. It wasn't a robbery. It was as if time had simply stopped, and then for everyone else continued without them. He kept walking, the silence pressing in on him. He passed a park where children usually laughed and played. Now a swing set creaked faintly in the breeze, empty and mournful. A bright red plastic ball lay in the middle of a sandbox, a testament to a game abruptly abandoned. Each detail was a fresh stab of horror, a confirmation of the incomprehensible truth. This wasn't localized. This wasn't a citywide event. The global blackout he'd witnessed from his window, the instantaneous cessation of all power across continents, was intertwined with this. It wasn't just the electricity that had vanished. It was humanity itself. The crushing weight of solitude began to settle in, a physical ache in his chest. He was alone, utterly, completely, terrifyingly alone. The thought was a scream trapped in his throat, a silent agony that threatened to overwhelm him. He stumbled, catching himself on a lamppost, his vision blurring. How could this happen? How could everyone simply vanish? There were no signs of a struggle, no bodies, no blood, no chaos. Just an eerie, pristine emptiness. It defied every logical explanation, every disaster scenario he could conjure. A virus? No, there would be sickness, panic, bodies. An invasion? No, there would be destruction, conflict. This was different. This was clean. Too clean. He found himself standing in front of a supermarket, its automatic doors now inert, a gaping maw of darkness. He pushed one open manually, the heavy glass groaning in protest. Inside, rows and rows of food, perfectly stocked shelves, but no shoppers, no employees. A grocery cart stood abandoned in an aisle, a half-filled basket of items inside. A cashier's light was on, but the register was dark. This was a world untouched by a cataclysm, yet utterly devoid of life. It was a stage set for a play that would never be performed, a vast, elaborate diorama of human existence, meticulously preserved, yet chillingly empty. The sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the empty streets. Michael felt a strange sense of detachment, as if he were watching himself from afar, a lone, insignificant figure in a ghost town stretching across the entire planet. His initial panic was slowly giving way to a cold, analytical dread. He had to understand. He had to know why. He needed to get higher, to see more, to find some pattern, some clue. He remembered the observation deck of the old skyscraper downtown, a place where tourists once marveled at the city's sprawl. If he could get to the top, maybe he could see if it was the same everywhere. Maybe, just maybe, he would see a flicker of light, a wisp of smoke, a sign of someone else. The hope was a fragile, desperate thing, but it was enough to propel him forward. He was no longer just a survivor. He was a detective, thrust into the most impossible mystery the world had ever known. And the first step was to confirm the unthinkable, to truly grasp the scale of his solitude, before he could even begin to search for answers, or for the vanished. He started walking towards the towering silhouette of the skyscraper, a tiny solitary figure against the vast, silent backdrop of a world that had forgotten how to breathe. The walk felt endless, each step echoing in the profound silence that had become the world's new soundtrack. Michael's mind raced, a furious current against the stillness, trying to grasp the inexplicable. The skyscraper grew larger with every stride, its dark glass facade reflecting the dim, anemic light of the post-blackout sky like a giant sightless eye. It was an edifice that once hummed with thousands of lives, a vertical city within a city, now just a monumental tombstone. As he finally reached its base, the revolving door stood still, frozen in mid-turn, as if the last person to pass through had simply evaporated. He pushed one of the panels and it groaned, a rusty protest against the sudden movement, before giving way with an unnerving ease. The lobby was a tableau of suspended animation. A half-eaten bagel sat on a reception desk, a coffee cup still steaming faintly, a forgotten smartphone face down on the polished marble floor. It was as if everyone had simply vanished mid-sentence, mid-sip, mid-stride. No chaos, no struggle, just emptiness. The air inside was stale, heavy with the ghost of human presence. Michael's own breath seemed unnaturally loud in the cavernous space. He called out, his voice hoarse, "Hello? Is anyone here?" The words died in the vastness, swallowed by the silence, returning only a hollow echo that seemed to mock his desperate hope. He walked past rows of abandoned security turnstiles, their green lights dead, past defunct digital directories that once flashed with company names and floor numbers. He ran a hand over a cold marble counter, the dust of fine film beneath his fingertips. This was not a power outage. This was something far, far worse. The elevators were, predictably, dead. Their polished steel doors stared back at him blankly, reflecting his own grim, bewildered face. He found the emergency stairwell, a narrow concrete shaft that promised an arduous climb. Each floor was identical in its desolate perfection. Conference rooms with chairs pushed in, whiteboards filled with half-erased notes, offices with personal photos still on desks, plants wilting in the dim light. It was a museum of the mundane, each artifact a testament to a life abruptly, completely, inexplicably interrupted. On the 10th floor, a child's bright crayon drawing was taped to the inside of an office cubicle, a stick figure family smiling under a yellow sun. The innocence of it hit Michael like a physical blow, a sharp pang of grief for the lives that had been here, for the families torn apart by this silent, invisible cataclysm. Who was this child? Where were they now? The questions were a relentless drumbeat in his skull, each one unanswered, each one driving him deeper into the heart of the mystery. He continued his ascent, the rhythmic thud of his boots on the concrete stairs the only sound for what felt like hours. He was looking for anything, a clue, a sign, a message, a survivor. He reached the 25th floor, sweat beading on his forehead, his legs aching. This floor seemed different. The main corridor was dimly lit by emergency lights, which were somehow still flickering, drawing power from some hidden, failing backup system. The air here felt colder, heavier. He pushed open a door marked server room. Inside, rows of massive server racks stood humming faintly, their indicator lights blinking erratically, a discordant symphony in the oppressive silence. A single monitor on a desk was still active, displaying a frantic, scrolling stream of text. Error messages, network failures, system shutdowns. And then something else. A line of code that seemed out of place, a series of symbols he didn't recognize. He leaned closer, his brow furrowed. It looked like a foreign script, or perhaps a corrupted data stream, but it had a rhythm, an almost deliberate pattern. Suddenly, a low guttural growl vibrated through the floor. Michael froze, his heart leaping into his throat. It wasn't human. It wasn't animal. It was a deep mechanical thrum that seemed to emanate from the very core of the building. A sound that shifted and pulsed, almost like a massive hidden engine struggling to restart. He gripped a heavy wrench lying on the desk, his knuckles white. He wasn't alone. Or at least the building wasn't. He backed away slowly from the monitor, his eyes darting around the room. The growl intensified, a resonant hum that made the very air vibrate. It felt like the building itself was alive, or was being awakened. He noticed a single, solitary chair overturned near one of the server racks, unlike the pristine order elsewhere. And on the floor next to it, a small metallic object, dark and smooth, almost like a polished stone, but with intricate, almost microscopic etchings on its surface. He bent down, his hand trembling slightly as he reached for it. The object was cold to the touch, surprisingly heavy. It didn't look like anything he'd ever seen. No buttons, no discernible function. It radiated a faint, almost imperceptible warmth against his palm. As he held it, the strange symbols on the monitor seemed to flicker faster, and the mechanical growl in the building intensified, rising to a disorienting pitch. He felt a strange vibration in his hand, as if the object itself was resonating with the building's mysterious hum. He pocketed the object, a knot of unease tightening in his stomach. This wasn't just a blackout. This wasn't just a disappearance. There was something else at play, something vast and incomprehensible. He had to get out of the server room. The air felt charged, almost electric. He could feel a pressure building, a sense of immense energy gathering. He stumbled back into the main corridor, the emergency lights now flickering more violently. The mechanical growl was deafening now, vibrating through his very bones. He looked out a window. The city, still shrouded in darkness, seemed to be responding. Distant, faint lights like fireflies began to appear on the horizon, not the steady glow of restored power, but erratic, pulsed flashes, sometimes red, sometimes blue, sometimes a sickly green. It was as if the entire grid was trying to scream back to life, or perhaps was being forced to. He ran, his fear a cold, sharp blade in his gut. Down the emergency stairs he went, no longer caring about the aching in his legs, only the desperate need to escape the building that felt like it was coming alive around him. The growling pursued him, echoing up the stairwell, growing louder with every floor he descended. He could hear the groan of metal, the deep thrum of unseen machinery shifting and whirring. What was happening? Was it a natural event, some kind of geological resonance, or something far more sinister, a deliberate awakening? He burst out of the stairwell on the ground floor, gasping for breath, his lungs burning. The lobby was no longer silent. The deep, resonant growl was everywhere, amplified by the vast space. And then he saw it. The large, central digital directory, which had been dead moments ago, was now flickering erratically. Not with company names, but with the same strange symbols he had seen on the server room monitor. They pulsed with an eerie, internal light, shifting and morphing, forming intricate patterns that seemed to defy logic. He stared, mesmerized and terrified. The symbols weren't static. They were moving, evolving, almost communicating. And then, from the corners of his eyes, he caught a glimpse of movement. A shadow, not a human one, but something amorphous, darker than the surrounding gloom, seemed to shift and writhe at the edge of his vision, just beyond the range of the dim emergency lights. He spun around, but there was nothing there, just the echoing growl and the pulsating symbols. His heart hammered against his ribs. He wasn't alone. Something was definitely here. Something that had been dormant, something that was now awakening. Was it tied to the blackout? To the disappearances? Was this what had taken everyone? The thought sent a fresh wave of terror through him. He had to get out. He sprinted towards the revolving doors, pushing through them with desperate force. The moment he was outside, the growling seemed to diminish slightly, though it still vibrated through the ground beneath his feet. He looked back at the skyscraper. The strange pulsating lights were now visible through its glass facade, emanating from within, casting an otherworldly glow. The building was a beacon of the unknown, a monument to a new terrifying reality. Michael ran, not knowing where he was going, only that he had to put distance between himself and that awakening structure. He clutched the mysterious metallic object in his pocket, its faint warmth a constant, unsettling reminder of what he had found and what he had disturbed. The city around him remained a silent, empty canvas, but now it felt like the canvas itself was beginning to stir, to ripple with unseen forces. The initial shock of the disappearances was now replaced by a chilling certainty. The human race wasn't just gone, it had been taken, and whatever had taken them was still here. He was alone, but he was no longer safe in his solitude. He was being hunted or perhaps simply observed. The game had changed, and Michael unknowingly had just picked up the first piece of the puzzle, a puzzle that might reveal a truth far more terrifying than total annihilation. He had to find other survivors, if any existed, before it was too late, before whatever slumbering entity had awakened in the heart of the city fully revealed itself. He was now a participant, not just an observer, in the unfolding horror. Michael's immediate thought was to get higher, to gain a vantage point. The skyscraper he had just escaped was too dangerous, too close to the anomaly. He needed to find a different tall structure, maybe a less damaged one, to survey the city. His apartment building was out of the question. It was too far and he'd already seen its fate. He started moving, carefully navigating the debris-strewn streets. The silence was the first thing that struck him again. A profound, unnatural quiet that swallowed the city whole. No distant sirens, no hum of electricity, no chatter of people. Just the crunch of his boots on shattered glass and the occasional creak of twisted metal in the wind. The air too felt different. Heavy, almost metallic, with an underlying scent he couldn't quite place. Something acrid yet organic, like ozone mixed with decay. His gaze constantly swept the empty storefronts, the dark windows of towering buildings. Each shadow seemed to lengthen, to twist into grotesque shapes in his peripheral vision. His mind, still reeling from the impossible sight of the shifting skyline, now latched onto every minute detail, turning mundane objects into potential threats. A discarded newspaper fluttering in a gust of wind made him flinch. A sudden clatter from an alleyway, likely a stray animal, sent a jolt of adrenaline through him. He knew he couldn't afford to be paralyzed by fear. He needed a plan. Water was the immediate concern. Food he had some, but water would run out fast. And then the others. Were there others? He had seen no one since the blackout. The thought was a chilling echo in the vast emptiness. Michael decided to head towards the old financial district. It was denser, more likely to have office buildings with emergency supplies or at least more vantage points. He kept to the middle of the street, avoiding the looming shadows of buildings where unseen dangers might lurk. The further he moved from the immediate zone of the anomaly, the less severe the structural damage seemed, but the pervasive sense of abandonment remained. He passed a deserted diner, its neon sign dark, a single plastic menu still propped against the window, advertising a breakfast special that would never be served. Further on, a bus had veered into a lamppost, its front crumpled, its doors slightly ajar, as if its passengers had simply vanished into thin air. He peered inside, heart pounding. Empty. Just rows of vacant seats, illuminated by the ghostly glow of the overcast sky. The city was a tomb. As he walked, a new, unsettling phenomenon began to manifest. The air, already thick with that strange scent, now seemed to shimmer intermittently, like heat haze rising from asphalt, but without any discernible heat source. It was more pronounced near intersections, near the skeletal remains of what looked like power substations. And sometimes, for just a fraction of a second, he thought he saw faint, almost imperceptible lines of light, like static electricity, tracing patterns in the air before vanishing. He blinked, rubbed his eyes, convinced it was just fatigue, just his mind playing tricks. But the feeling persisted. It was as if the very fabric of reality was fraying at the edges. He found himself nearing a large, modern office complex, its glass facade mostly intact, though several windows were spiderwebbed with cracks. It had a public access rooftop garden, he recalled, a place where workers used to take their lunch breaks, offering panoramic views. It was a risk entering such a large building, but the reward of a clear overview was too great to ignore. He approached the main entrance, a revolving door froze in mid-spin. The automatic sliding doors were jammed. He tried a side entrance, pushing against a heavy service door. It gave way with a groan of rusted hinges. The interior was pitch black, a cavernous space echoing with his own shallow breaths. He pulled out his phone, its flashlight a weak beam against the overwhelming darkness. The lobby was a scene of suspended chaos. Papers littered the floor, overturned chairs, a forgotten coffee cup still perched precariously on a reception desk. It was as if everyone had simply dropped what they were doing and vanished. There was no sign of struggle, no blood, nothing violent. Just absence. He navigated towards the elevator banks. Of course they were dead. He found the emergency stairwell. The climb began. Up step after agonizing step, the silence pressing in on him, broken only by the rhythmic thud of his boots and the frantic beat of his own heart. Each floor was identical in its desolate stillness. Desks, computers, personal effects all abandoned. It was a museum of a vanished civilization. Around the 20th floor he paused, leaning against a wall, gasping for breath. His legs burned. He was not prepared for this. He was an analyst, not an urban explorer. The thought brought a bitter, ironic smile to his lips. Analyst, he muttered, the word sounding alien in the profound quiet. What was there left to analyze? The end of the world? He continued his ascent. As he neared the higher floors, he noticed something else. A faint, almost subliminal hum. It wasn't the hum of electricity, not mechanical. It felt organic, like a deep vibration, a low thrum that resonated in his bones rather than his ears. It grew stronger the higher he went, and with it, the shimmering in the air became more frequent, more pronounced. The faint lines of light were no longer just a trick of the eye. They were there, weaving intricate, shifting patterns, like an invisible web catching the ambient light. They seemed to converge, to pulse faintly, towards the heart of the city, towards where he had seen the impossible geometry. His stomach clenched. This wasn't just a blackout. This was something else entirely. The city wasn't just dead. It was transformed, becoming something alien, something that resonated with an unseen power. He finally reached the roof access door. It was heavy steel and thankfully unlocked. He pushed it open, stepping out into the cool, damp air. The sky was still a bruised, overcast gray, but here high above the streets, the panorama was breathtaking and terrifying. The city stretched out before him, an endless expanse of dark, silent monoliths. The sheer scale of the desolation was overwhelming. He could see for miles. And there, in the distance towards the geographic center of the metropolis, was the impossible structure. It was still there, still shifting, still defying the laws of physics. From this height, he could see how it seemed to warp the very light around it, creating distortions that rippled outwards. But that wasn't all. His eyes scanned the rooftops, hoping for a sign of life, a smoke signal, anything. And then he saw it. Not on a rooftop, but on the side of a building directly opposite him a few blocks away. A crudely painted symbol, a circle with a diagonal line through it, and beneath it, an arrow pointing down. It was painted in what looked like faded red spray paint, almost camouflaged against the dark brick. His heart leaped. A symbol, a human symbol, not part of the strange new reality, but a deliberate mark. Could it be a sign from another survivor? Or a warning? The arrow pointed down, perhaps to a lower level or an entrance. He felt a surge of hope, quickly followed by a wave of apprehension. Who would paint such a thing? And why? Was it a trap? In a world where the very laws of reality were bending, trust was a luxury he couldn't afford. But the alternative was to remain alone, to succumb to the creeping dread and the slow, inevitable creep of the unknown. He looked back at the impossible structure in the distance, then at the symbol. One represented the overwhelming alien threat, the other a potential path to understanding, to connection, to fighting back. He made his choice. He needed to get to that building. As he turned to descend, he noticed something else on the rooftop garden. Tucked away behind a large overturned planter, almost hidden, was a small grimy backpack. It looked well-used, military-grade, not the kind of bag an office worker would carry. Hesitantly, he approached it. His mind raced. Was someone else here? Had they just left? Or had they been here longer? He picked it up. It was surprisingly heavy. He unzipped the main compartment. Inside he found a few items: a worn dog-eared journal, a multi-tool, a compact first aid kit, and a small two-way radio. The radio was old, analog, with a powerful antenna. He pressed the power button. Nothing. Dead. Of course. But it was a radio. A glimmer of hope. Maybe it just needed new batteries. He flipped through the journal. The first few pages were standard entries. Dates, locations, mundane observations. But as he went deeper, the handwriting became more frantic, the entries more desperate. He started to read, his eyes scanning the hurried script. August 14th blackout. Entire city plunged into darkness. No power. No comms. Panic everywhere. Saw things, impossible things. Like the sky was tearing open. August 16th. The silence is deafening. People are gone. Just gone. No bodies, just empty streets. The air feels wrong. There's a hum now. A low thrum that vibrates in your chest. August 18th found the symbol. Others. They left it. A message. They say it's a beacon. A way to find the nodes. What are nodes? They're talking about convergence. I don't understand any of it. But they say the symbol means safe passage to those who understand. A way to avoid. The pool. Michael's blood ran cold. The pool. What did that mean? He looked up, his gaze drawn back to the shimmering air, the faint lines of light, the impossible geometry in the distance. Was that the pool? The journal continued. They're gathering at the old library. Supposed to be a neutral zone. They say the entity, it feeds on the chaos, on the fear. But it listens. It listens. The words echoed in Michael's mind, a chilling whisper. The entity wasn't just a destructive force. It was sentient, aware. It was listening. To what? To them? To him? He quickly skimmed the remaining pages. The entries became fragmented, almost incoherent. Mentions of the whispers, the shadows, and a growing sense of paranoia. The last entry, dated just a few days ago, was barely legible. They're wrong. The library isn't safe. Nowhere is safe. The symbols, they're not beacons. They're traps. It's all a lie. They want us to gather, to be easier to find, easier to harvest. Don't go to the library. Don't trust the symbols. The pull is everywhere. It's inside us. It's feeding. The last word was smeared, as if the writer had been interrupted, or had collapsed in terror. Michael stared at the journal, then at the symbol on the building opposite, then back at the impossible structure in the distance. His hope had been extinguished, replaced by a fresh wave of dread. The symbol, initially a beacon of hope, was now tainted by this chilling warning. The library, a potential sanctuary, was now a potential death trap. And the pull, which he now understood as the entity's influence, was not just an external force but something that could be inside us, something that feeds. He was caught between two terrifying possibilities: follow a potentially false lead to a dangerous gathering, or remain alone, utterly isolated, a lone target for whatever malevolent force was now consuming the city. The journal writer's final words screamed a warning, but offered no alternative. He closed the journal, his hands trembling. The radio, the multi-tool, the first aid kit, these were practical tools. But the journal, it was a window into a nightmare, into the fragmented thoughts of someone who had seen too much, understood too little, and ultimately had been consumed by the horror. He looked across at the building with the red symbol. Was it a trap, as the journal claimed? Or was the journal writer simply driven mad by fear? The entity listens. Could it manipulate survivors, sow discord, create false trails? Michael took a deep, shuddering breath. He had to make a choice, and quickly. The silence of the city, punctuated by that low, organic hum, felt more menacing than ever. He was no longer just searching for survivors. He was searching for the truth, navigating a labyrinth of fear and deception in a world that had fundamentally broken. He had to decide whether to trust the symbol or the desperate, possibly deranged, warning of a vanished stranger. The weight of that decision pressed down on him, heavy and cold, as he stood alone on the rooftop, the impossible city sprawling beneath him, waiting. The weight of that decision pressed down on him, heavy and cold, as he stood alone on the rooftop, the impossible city sprawling beneath him, waiting. He had to choose. The symbol, a beacon of geometric perfection, cold and inviting, promising an answer through an alien language. Or the warning, a frantic scrawl of human despair, whispering of a hidden danger, a truth beneath the surface. The symbol felt like a trap, too elegant, too easy in its promise of clarity. The warning, however deranged, resonated with the primal fear that had been gnawing at him since the blackout. It spoke of something actively malevolent, something that saw. The surface is a lie, the stranger had etched. They see through the gaps. That phrase echoed in his mind, chilling him far more than the biting wind. It wasn't just the darkness that was dangerous. It was the deception woven into the very fabric of this new reality. The symbol then could be part of that lie, a lure leading him deeper into the unknown. He chose the warning. He had to understand what they were, and what gaps they saw through. He turned from the symbol, its stark lines fading behind him as he made his way back to the rooftop access door. The descent through the silent skyscraper was a descent into a deeper kind of dread. Each step down the emergency stairwell felt heavier, the air growing colder, thicker. The city, once an abstract threat from above, now loomed with an immediate, suffocating presence. Every shadow seemed to shift, every creak of the building a potential precursor to something unseen. Reaching the ground floor, he pushed open the heavy lobby doors. The street lay before him, a canyon of glass and steel bathed in the ghostly luminescence of a moonless sky and the faint, unsettling glow of distant, unknown sources. Abandoned vehicles stood like petrified beasts, their paint dulled, their windows reflecting nothing but the oppressive void. The silence was no longer merely the absence of sound. It was a living entity pressing in on him, amplifying the frantic beat of his own heart. He couldn't face this alone. Jessica and Michael, they were his only anchor, the last vestiges of a world he understood. He had to find them, share what he'd found, and together try to decipher the cryptic message. Their apartment building was only a few blocks away, but in this new reality, a few blocks felt like an odyssey. He started walking, keeping to the shadows, his senses hyper-alert. The city was a maze of familiar landmarks rendered alien. A corner store, its windows shattered, displayed mannequins frozen in grotesque poses amidst scattered debris. A children's playground, swaying faintly in a non-existent breeze, seemed to hum with an unheard melody of lost innocence. He forced himself to focus, to push past the psychological assault of the desolate urban landscape. As he navigated the familiar streets, a new, unsettling observation began to prick at his awareness. Certain patches of the urban fabric seemed wrong, not just dark but actively dark. Areas where even the ambient, ghostly light of the city seemed to be swallowed, creating pockets of absolute blackness that felt denser, more substantial than mere shadow. And within these voids, if he stared long enough, he thought he could perceive fleeting distortions, ripples in the air, like heat haze on a summer road, but cold and silent. They see through the gaps. Was this what the stranger had meant? These abyssal patches, were they the gaps? And if so, what was seeing through them? He quickened his pace, a new urgency propelling him forward. The thought of those unseen eyes watching from the active darkness sent a shiver down his spine. He had to reach Jessica and Michael. Finally, he saw their building, a block of concrete and glass, indistinguishable from hundreds of others, yet to him a potential sanctuary. His hope surged, only to be immediately crushed by the sight of their main entrance. The heavy glass door was ajar, hanging precariously on one hinge, a splintered mess of wood and metal around the frame. Not a clean break but a violent rending. A cold knot formed in his stomach. He pushed the door open further, the groan of tortured metal echoing through the empty lobby. The air inside was stale, heavy with the scent of dust and something else. Something metallic, faintly acrid. He called out, his voice a hoarse whisper in the cavernous space. "Jessica? Michael?" No response, only the unnerving silence. He ascended the stairs two at a time, his heart hammering against his ribs. Their apartment was on the 5th floor. Each flight felt endless, each landing a potential ambush. He reached their floor, his hand instinctively going for the knife he kept strapped to his boot. The corridor was dark, the doors lining it like silent, watchful eyes. Their apartment door was also ajar, pushed inward, revealing a sliver of darkness within. He hesitated, then pushed it open slowly. The apartment was not ransacked in the typical sense. No overturned furniture, no broken glass. But it was empty. Their emergency supplies, the water bottles, the canned goods, the medical kit were gone from their usual spot by the kitchen counter. The backpack they always kept ready, Michael's, was missing. Jessica's favorite scarf, which she never went anywhere without, was not on its hook by the door. He moved deeper into the apartment, the hair on his arms standing on end. This wasn't a robbery. This was an organized absence. They hadn't been taken by force, not violently, at least not in a way that left obvious signs of struggle. It was as if they had left in a hurry, taking only what was essential. But why? And where? He checked the bedroom. The bed was unmade, a pillow askew. On the nightstand, Jessica's small, leather-bound journal lay open. He picked it up, his fingers trembling. It was open to a recent entry, dated 2 days after the blackout. His eyes scanned the familiar handwriting, a desperate plea for hope, a yearning for normalcy. But it wasn't the words that caught his attention. It was what lay pressed between the pages. A single desiccated flower, its petals a brittle brown, yet still clinging to a fragile beauty. And beneath it, a hastily drawn sketch. It was the symbol, the geometric perfection he'd seen on the rooftop. But this one was different. It wasn't perfect. It was distorted, as if someone had tried to draw it from memory, or perhaps deliberately altered it. One of the lines was jagged, broken, and next to it, scrawled in a frantic hand that mirrored the stranger's warning. They followed the light. His mind reeled. Jessica had seen the symbol. She had drawn it. And the message, they followed the light, directly contradicted the rooftop stranger's warning about the darkness being a lie and the light that follows. Or did it? If the symbol was a lure, a false light, then following it would be a mistake. Had Jessica and Michael seen the symbol, believed it to be a path to safety, and gone towards it? He clutched the journal, his knuckles white. Had they made the opposite choice? Had they trusted the symbol, the perfect alien geometry, over the gut feeling of impending doom? And what did they follow the light truly mean? Had Jessica and Michael followed the light? Or had something else followed them because they had been drawn to it? The ambiguity was terrifying. He looked around the empty apartment, a cold dread settling deep in his bones. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about deciphering a language of deception, navigating a landscape of hidden threats, and finding his friends before they were lost forever to whatever malevolent force had taken root in the silence. The city outside, with its active darkness and its ghostly luminescence, felt less like a tomb and more like a hunting ground. And he was now the prey, armed with two conflicting warnings and a desperate hope. He had to find them. He had to understand what light they had followed, and what gaps allowed something to see. The air grew colder, each breath a shallow ghost in the crushing silence. Michael moved, a solitary beam of light carving a nervous path through the absolute blackness. Every shadow seemed to writhe. Every distant creak of the facility groaned with a malevolent presence. He clutched the heavy wrench, its cold metal a small, inadequate comfort against the overwhelming dread. His mind raced, grappling with the two conflicting directives, Dr. Eris's dying plea to avoid light, and the chillingly calm instruction from the entity to follow it. Which was the predator's lure, and which the path to salvation? Or were both just elaborate traps? He pressed himself against a cold concrete wall, pausing to listen. Nothing. Only the frantic thumping of his own heart, a drumbeat against the silence. The facility felt vast, endless, a labyrinth designed to swallow hope. He realized he was no longer just searching for survivors. He was searching for answers to a riddle whispered by a dying man and an unknown omnipresent voice. What kind of light had Emily and David followed? And what were these gaps that allowed something to see? He considered turning off his flashlight, plunging himself into the same impenetrable black that shrouded everything else. But the thought was paralyzing. Blindness would be a death sentence, a surrender to whatever lurked. He needed to see, even if seeing was a risk. He decided to use the light sparingly, sweeping it in quick, wide arcs, never allowing it to linger, hoping to make himself a less obvious target. He remembered what Dr. Eris had said about them being drawn to light, like moths to a flame. But what if they were the ones who created the light or mimicked it? What if the entity was the thing Dr. Eris warned him about, simply playing a cruel game? He navigated through a series of identical corridors, each door a dark maw. He tried several, finding them locked, or leading to more darkened, empty rooms. He was looking for anything, a footprint, a discarded item, a sign, however faint, that Emily or David had passed this way. The air grew heavy with a metallic scent, subtle but persistent, like old blood or ozone. He followed it, his senses heightened, every nerve ending screaming caution. The corridor opened into a larger chamber, the source of the metallic tang. His flashlight beam revealed a scene that made his blood run cold. It was a makeshift camp, hastily abandoned. 2 sleeping bags were tossed aside. A half-eaten protein bar lay on the floor, and a small portable radio lay shattered, its wires splayed like broken bones. This was Emily and David's. He knew it. A surge of relief mixed with a fresh wave of terror. They had been here. They were alive, at least recently. But where were they now? And what had happened? He knelt, examining the radio. It looked like it had been violently smashed. Not dropped, but intentionally destroyed. Why? Had they been trying to communicate? Or had something wanted to prevent them from doing so? He swept his light around the room, finding no signs of struggle, no blood. Just an abrupt, inexplicable abandonment. It was as if they had simply vanished. Then his light caught something else. On the wall, scrawled in what looked like charcoal or burnt wood, was a crude drawing. It was a series of interconnected circles, some filled in, some left hollow, forming a vague, almost organic pattern. Below it, a single word: gaps. Michael felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold air. This had to be David's doing or Emily's. They were trying to tell him something. The gaps Dr. Eris had mentioned. But what did the circles mean? And why were some filled in while others were not? He stood, his mind racing. The metallic smell was stronger here, almost acrid. He noticed a faint, almost imperceptible hum in the air. A low-frequency vibration that seemed to resonate in his teeth. It was too subtle to be a generator, too pervasive to be a loose pipe. Felt electrical but wrong. Like static electricity on a massive scale. He moved slowly, his eyes scanning every inch of the room. The hum grew, a low thrumming that seemed to emanate from the very walls. He felt a prickling sensation on his skin like tiny needles. And then he saw it. Not in the beam of his flashlight, but at its very edge, where the light faded into shadow. A faint, almost phosphorescent glow. It was subtle, like the last embers of a dying fire, but undeniably there. It pulsed with a low hum, a soft ethereal rhythm. Michael froze. Dr. Eris's warning echoed. Asterisk, no light. It draws them. Asterisk, but then the entity's voice equally clear. Follow the light. This was a light, all right. But it wasn't a standard electrical light. It was organic, almost alive. Was this what they had followed? Was this the light the entity had spoken of? He took a cautious step towards it. The glow seemed to emanate from a crack in the far wall. A hairline fissure that pulsed with a strange internal luminescence. He felt a pull, a strange, almost hypnotic lure. It wasn't just visual, it was sensory, a subtle vibration in the air. A faint sweet smell he couldn't quite place. His survival instincts screamed at him to retreat, to extinguish his own light and disappear into the darkness. But another, more primal urge, the desperate need for answers, for connection, compelled him forward. He reached the crack, his flashlight beam momentarily overwhelming the faint glow, then adjusting. The light inside was mesmerizing, a slow rhythmic pulse of deep violet and electric blue. It wasn't hot, but radiated a strange, cool energy. He peered closer, trying to see what lay beyond the fissure. The crack widened slightly, revealing a glimpse of a larger space, filled with more of the pulsing, otherworldly light. It felt ancient, alien, yet strangely familiar, like a forgotten memory resurfacing. Suddenly a sound, not from the crack but from behind him. A low guttural growl that seemed to vibrate through the very floor. Michael spun around, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, his heart leaping into his throat. Nothing. Just the empty chamber, the abandoned camp, the shattered radio. But the growl had been real. It was deep, resonant, and it had filled the room. He instinctively extinguished his flashlight, plunging himself into absolute darkness. The sudden void was disorienting, terrifying. He pressed himself against the wall, wrench raised, his breath shallow, trying to control the frantic pounding in his chest. In the sudden, profound black, the faint violet-blue light from the crack in the wall seemed to intensify, becoming the only visible thing. It was still pulsing, a beacon in the terrifying void. The growl came again, closer this time, accompanied by a faint scraping sound, like something heavy being dragged across the concrete floor. It was moving, circling him. He could feel its presence, a cold, predatory awareness in the darkness, even if he couldn't see it. It was intelligent, patient. It knew he was there. He realized the trap. His own light had drawn it in. And now, the light from the crack, the very thing the entity had told him to follow, was illuminating him, making him a perfect target in the otherwise perfect dark. He was caught between two impossible choices. He couldn't stay in the absolute dark. He was blind, helpless. But any light made him visible to whatever hunted him. He had to move. He had to use the gaps. He remembered the drawing on the wall, the circles, some filled, some hollow. What if the hollow ones were the gaps? Places where it couldn't see or couldn't reach. And the filled ones, the places of danger, of light? He took a desperate chance. With his flashlight still off, he began to move, his hands outstretched, feeling his way along the wall, trying to make as little sound as possible. The scraping sound followed him, a slow, deliberate pursuit. He could hear its heavy breathing now, a raspy, moist sound that made his stomach churn. It was close. Too close. His hand brushed against something cold and metallic sticking out from the wall. He fumbled for it, his fingers closing around a thick, industrial pipe. He used it to pull himself forward, moving faster, his mind racing. He had to find a gap, a place of true darkness, where even the strange, pulsing light from the crack couldn't reach. Suddenly, his foot snagged on something. He stumbled, catching himself before he fell. His hand instinctively reached out, touching something soft, yielding. A body. A gasp escaped his lips, choked back by terror. He fumbled for his flashlight, his thumb shaking as he clicked it on. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the horrifying scene. Lying on the floor, curled into a fetal position, was Emily. Her eyes were wide open, staring blankly upwards, fixed on the pulsing violet-blue light from the crack in the wall. Her skin was pale, almost translucent, and a faint, almost invisible shimmer seemed to cling to her. Her lips were parted, and a low, continuous hum vibrated from her throat, perfectly in sync with the ancient, alien light. She was alive but utterly unresponsive, completely mesmerized, hypnotized. And then just behind her, half hidden in the shadows, he saw it. A shape, tall, impossibly thin, its form indistinct against the gloom. A silhouette that seemed to absorb all light rather than reflect it. Its head was tilted as if listening, its gaze fixed not on Michael, but on Emily, on the light that held her captive. Its presence was a physical weight, crushing the air from his lungs. This was it. The hunter. The thing that saw through the gaps, that was drawn to the light. And it was here. It was real. And it had Emily. The world narrowed to a pinprick of green. Michael's heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the silence of the hospital. Every nerve ending screamed, demanding flight, demanding surrender, but his eyes were locked on Emily, on the light that held her captive. Its presence was a physical weight, crushing the air from his lungs. This was it. The hunter. The thing that saw through the gaps, that was drawn to the light. And it was here. It was real. And it had Emily. For a terrifying beat, Michael was frozen, a statue of pure, unadulterated fear. The air grew impossibly cold around him, a chill that seeped into his bones, numbing his thoughts. Emily's eyes, wide and unblinking, met his from within the sickly glow. There was no scream, no sound from her, just a silent, desperate plea that tore through Michael's paralysis. He saw the terror in her face, the way her body was held rigid, not by choice, but by some unseen force radiating from the light. It was a cage of pure energy, holding her motionless, a moth pinned to a board. Then a surge of adrenaline, hot and violent, ripped through Michael's fear. It was primal, an instinct older than thought. He wasn't a soldier, not a hero, but Emily was his life. He wouldn't let this thing take her. His hand flew to the hunting knife strapped to his hip, the cold steel a sudden, comforting weight. He didn't think, he didn't plan. He just moved. With a guttural roar that felt ripped from the depths of his soul, Michael launched himself forward, the knife a gleaming extension of his desperate will. He aimed for the source of the green light, for the indistinct form that hovered over Emily. The creature, if that's what it was impossibly fast. It moved with a fluid, unnatural grace, a blur of shadow that seemed to ripple out of existence and reappear a foot to its left. Michael's knife sliced through empty air, the force of his lunge throwing him slightly off balance. He recovered instantly, his eyes now trying to pierce the oppressive darkness that seemed to cling to the thing's form. It was tall, impossibly so, its frame gaunt and elongated, like a silhouette stretched thin against a canvas of deeper night. Its skin, if it was skin, seemed to absorb all ambient light, appearing like polished obsidian, featureless and black. There were no discernible eyes, no mouth, just a vague shadowed cowl where a head should be. The only break in its absolute darkness was the pulsating, sickly green light that emanated from what appeared to be an elongated hand or forearm that held Emily in its grip. It wasn't just illuminating her, it was part of her captivity. The light thrummed, a low resonant vibration that Michael felt in his chest, a soundless hum that vibrated the very air. Emily's eyes, still locked on Michael, were filled with a fresh wave of terror as the creature subtly shifted, drawing her fractionally closer. She tried to move. Michael saw the tremor in her limbs, but the green light held her fast. It was a terrifying dance of power and helplessness. Michael lunged again, this time aiming for the arm holding Emily, hoping to sever whatever connection it had. The creature didn't move its body. Instead, the hand holding Emily simply retracted, pulling her back with it at an impossible speed, just out of Michael's reach. The green light intensified, flaring slightly, and Michael felt a sharp, burning sensation behind his eyes, a disorientation that threatened to make him stumble. It wasn't just light, it was an assault. He gritted his teeth, refusing to give in. He couldn't fight this thing directly, not with a knife. It was too fast, too alien. He needed a distraction. His mind raced, desperate, searching for any advantage. The flashlight. His own heavy-duty flashlight, still clipped to his belt. With a sudden, desperate surge, Michael unclipped it, his fingers fumbling with the switch. He held it up, not pointing it at the creature, but away towards the far wall. Then with a frantic flick of his thumb, he clicked it on. A blinding beam of pure white light erupted, cutting through the oppressive darkness, momentarily searing Michael's own retinas. He didn't hesitate. With all his strength, he hurled the flashlight, a bright, spinning projectile, towards a stack of rusted medical carts at the far end of the room. The creature visibly recoiled, not from the physical impact of the flashlight, which bounced off the metal carts with a deafening clang, but from the sudden, uncontrolled burst of intense light. For a split second, its obsidian form seemed to waver, to become less solid, and the green pulse around Emily flickered, weakening its hold. "Emily! Now!" Michael yelled, his voice raw with effort. It was all she needed. With a gasping cry, a sound of pure relief and terror, Emily tore herself free from the creature's momentarily loosened grip. The green light snapped back into focus, but it was too late. She stumbled, falling forward, and Michael was there, grabbing her arm, pulling her up, swinging her behind him. "Run!" he screamed, shoving her towards the door they had entered through. Emily didn't need telling twice. Her legs, still shaky, found their footing, and she bolted into the absolute blackness of the corridor. Michael, his knife still gripped tight, backed away, his eyes fixed on the creature. It was no longer recoiling. Its head, or where its head should be, seemed to turn, its form coalescing, growing more substantial, more menacing. The low thrumming sound intensified, vibrating through the floor, through Michael's very bones. It was a sound of pure predatory focus. He turned and ran, following Emily's fading footsteps into the inky blackness. The corridor stretched endlessly, a labyrinth of unseen dangers. He heard Emily's ragged breathing ahead of him, the frantic rhythm of her footsteps. Then behind him, a sound that made his blood run cold. The thrumming. It was closer now, not just a vibration, but a distinct rhythmic hum that seemed to echo off the walls, growing in intensity. The creature was pursuing them, and it was fast. Impossibly fast. Michael pushed himself harder, his lungs burning, his muscles screaming in protest. He could hear Emily cry out ahead as she stumbled, but she didn't stop. He caught up to her, grabbing her hand, pulling her along. "Keep going." They rounded a corner, then another, the darkness pressing in on them, disorienting, suffocating. The thrumming behind them was a physical presence, a wave of sound that seemed to chase them relentlessly. Michael risked a glance over his shoulder. He saw nothing, but he felt it. He felt the cold, the absolute void that followed, the faint shimmering distortion in the air where the green light had been. It wasn't just light. It was a lingering residue, a sign that the creature had passed, leaving behind an unnatural chill that seemed to suck the warmth from the very stone of the hospital. They burst into what looked like an old administrative wing. Desks overturned, papers scattered, everything coated in a thick layer of dust and grime. Michael's eyes darted frantically, searching for an escape, a place to hide. A small dark opening caught his eye, a supply closet, perhaps, or a janitor's room. Anything. "In here," he gasped, pulling Emily towards it. He flung open the heavy metal door. Inside, it was a cramped, airless space, filled with the faint metallic smell of old cleaning supplies and mildew. He shoved Emily inside, then squeezed in after her, pulling the door shut with a soft click that sounded deafening in the sudden silence. They were plunged into absolute darkness, a black so profound it felt like a physical weight pressing down on them. Michael leaned against the door, his chest heaving, listening. Emily was pressed against him, trembling, her breath coming in short, choked gasps. He could feel the rapid thump of her heart against his arm. They stood there, huddled together in the suffocating black, listening to the silence. The thrumming had stopped. Had it lost them? Had it given up? Hope, a fragile, fleeting thing, flickered in Michael's chest. Then a low, resonant hum began again. Not behind the door, not directly outside. It was faint at first, then grew louder, coming from down the corridor to their left. And then, almost immediately, another hum, distinct but equally resonant, echoed from down the corridor to their right. Michael's blood ran cold. The single thrumming sound had split. It wasn't just one. Or, terrifyingly, it could mimic its own sound, creating a chilling symphony of pursuit, closing in from multiple directions. The silence of their hiding place was now a trap, a dark, airless box from which there might be no escape. They hadn't escaped the hunter. They had only found a smaller, darker cage. And now it seemed they were surrounded. The world outside their cramped prison tightened its grip. The faint, almost imperceptible sounds of movement from moments before now coalesced into distinct, unsettling noises. Scrabbling, not like rodent claws but something larger, heavier, dragging across concrete. Then a low, rhythmic thudding like a heavy sack being repeatedly dropped onto the floor, growing closer, circling their little box. Michael and Jessica huddled together, their breath ragged, each trying to draw strength from the other's trembling presence. Every creak of the old metal door, every shift in the building's unseen structure, felt like a direct assault on their sanity. The air grew thick with the metallic tang of fear and the dust of their hiding place. Jessica's eyes, wide and unblinking in the absolute darkness, searched for Michael's face, finding only the faintest outline. She reached for his hand, clutching it with a desperate intensity that spoke volumes without a single word. He squeezed back, a silent promise to fight until the very last breath. The thudding stopped directly outside their door. A profound, unnatural silence descended, more terrifying than any noise. It was the silence of a predator assessing its prey, of a trap sprung and waiting for the final struggle. They could almost feel the weight of its presence, a palpable, malevolent force pressing against the thin barrier separating them from oblivion. Then a sound that made their blood run cold. A slow, deliberate scrape, as if a long, sharp object was being dragged across the metal of the door itself, just above the handle. It wasn't random. It was probing, searching. A chill seeped into their bones, not just from the cold metal of their surroundings, but from the horrifying realization that whatever was out there, it was intelligent. It knew they were inside. It was toying with them. A low, guttural hum, the same sound that had haunted them through the desolate streets, vibrated through the metal, through their very bones. It was closer now, louder, a discordant symphony of menace. It was the hunter, or perhaps hunters. The scraping resumed, this time lower, near the bottom of the door, then moved up to the hinges. It was testing, trying to find a weakness. Michael swallowed hard, his throat dry. He leaned closer to Jessica. "It knows we're here," he whispered, his voice a raw rasp. "It's not just passing by." Jessica nodded against his shoulder, her body rigid with tension. "It's the same one," she breathed, the words barely audible. "The hum. It's unmistakable." The scraping stopped again. This time it was replaced by a more aggressive sound. A dull, heavy thump against the door, as if something large and weighty had been thrown against it. The entire structure shuddered. Dust rained down from the ceiling, stinging their eyes. They flinched, pressing themselves further into the corner. Another thump, harder this time. The old metal groaned under the impact, a high-pitched whine that sent shivers down their spines. A hairline crack spiderwebbed across the paint near the top of the doorframe. They exchanged a look of sheer terror. This wasn't just a threat. It was an imminent breach. "We can't stay here," Michael hissed, his mind racing, desperately searching for an alternative. "This door won't hold." "Where do we go?" Jessica asked, her voice trembling. "It's everywhere. We heard it from multiple directions." The banging intensified, becoming a relentless assault. Each impact rattled the entire closet, threatening to tear the door from its hinges. The guttural hum outside grew louder, a chilling chorus that suggested more than one entity. The thudding and scraping sounds returned, now layered with a new, disturbing noise, a rhythmic clacking, like hardened claws or bony knuckles striking the metal. Michael pressed his ear against the cold, vibrating wall, trying to discern the pattern, the number of attackers. It was chaotic, terrifying. He could hear the distinct sounds of multiple impacts, multiple sets of movements. It wasn't just one hunter anymore. They had stumbled into a nest, or perhaps the hunter had called for backup. The thought was sickening. There's more than one," he whispered, pulling back from the wall, his face pale. "I hear at least 2, maybe 3, moving around the whole perimeter." Jessica's eyes widened further, if that was possible. The realization hit them with the force of a physical blow. Their desperate dash for cover hadn't saved them. It had led them directly into a trap set by an entire pack. This wasn't just a hunter. It was a coordinated effort. The door groaned again, a louder, more ominous sound. A small dent appeared near the center, pushed inward. They were running out of time. Michael looked around their tiny space. It was a glorified broom closet, filled with a few dusty mops, buckets, and a stack of old cleaning supplies. There was no back exit, no vent large enough for them to squeeze through. They were truly cornered. "Think, Michael, think," Jessica urged, her voice tight with panic. "Is there anything at all?" His gaze fell upon a small, rusted fire extinguisher hanging on the wall beside them. It was old, probably empty, but it was heavy. He also noticed a loose metal pipe, part of an old plumbing system, running vertically in the corner, partially concealed by cobwebs. It looked sturdy. "The pipe," he muttered, pointing. "And the extinguisher. If we can get a jump on them. If we can make a distraction." "What kind of distraction?" Jessica asked, her eyes darting from the pipe to the door, which was now visibly bowing inward at the center. "The window," Michael suddenly said, a spark of desperate inspiration in his eyes. "The office building we came from. The one with the broken window. It was on the 3rd floor. We could make a run for it, try to get back there. It's a long shot, but it's better than waiting for them to break in here." Jessica looked at him, her face a mask of fear mixed with a sliver of hope. "Run where? They're outside. They'll see us. We create a diversion," Michael elaborated, his voice gaining a frantic energy. "We open the door just enough for me to throw something, the extinguisher, maybe as far as I can, away from the direction we want to go. Then we sprint. We have to be faster than them." The plan was insane, suicidal even. But with the door threatening to collapse at any moment, it was the only option they had. "What if it doesn't work?" Jessica whispered, imagining themselves caught in the open, exposed to the horrors that lurked in the darkness. "Then we fight," Michael said, his jaw set. "We don't go down without a fight. Come on, help me with this pipe." He grabbed the loose metal pipe, testing its weight. It was heavy, solid. He pulled it free with a grunt, the sound lost in the cacophony of banging outside. Jessica helped him, her small hands gripping the cold metal. It was a pathetic weapon against whatever waited beyond the door, but it was something. He handed her the pipe. "You take this. Stay behind me, but be ready. If anything gets past me, you hit it with everything you've got." Jessica nodded, her knuckles white as she gripped the pipe. She was terrified, but a steely resolve had begun to harden in her eyes. They had survived this long by relying on each other, by pushing past their fear, and by refusing to give up. This was no different. Michael then grabbed the fire extinguisher. It was heavier than he expected, but the weight felt reassuring in his hands. He could swing it, throw it. It was better than nothing. The door shuddered violently one last time, a loud crack echoing through the small space. A splintered hole appeared in the wood paneling, just below the lock. A faint, sickening smell wafted in, a mix of damp earth and something acrid metallic. And through the hole a glimpse of movement, not flesh, but something darkly metallic, almost chitinous, reflecting the faint ambient light of the city beyond. It wasn't human. It wasn't an animal. It was something else entirely. A deep, resonant growl emanated from directly outside the hole, a sound that seemed to tear through the fabric of reality itself. It was a sound of primal hunger, of utter inhumanity. "Now!" Michael yelled, his voice raw. "On 3. 3. He pushed against the door with all his might, forcing it open just enough to create a narrow gap. The moment the gap appeared, a flash of dark, segmented form lunged inward, a limb ending in a wicked, razor-sharp point. Michael reacted instantly, not even pausing to aim. He hurled the fire extinguisher with every ounce of his strength, not at the creature, but past it, hoping to create a loud impact further down the corridor. The heavy cylinder flew through the air, disappearing into the darkness with a metallic clang as it struck something unseen. The creature recoiled momentarily, startled by the unexpected projectile. That was all the time Michael needed. He yanked the door fully open, pulling Jessica behind him. The corridor was a swirling kaleidoscope of shadows and distorted shapes. 3 distinct figures, tall and unnaturally slender, moved with an unsettling jerky grace. Their forms were vaguely humanoid, but their limbs were too long, their bodies covered in what looked like dark, faceted armor that absorbed the faint light. Their heads were indistinct, merging with the shadows, but Michael could feel the intensity of their gaze, the predatory focus. They were the source of the guttural hum, a low collective vibration that filled the air. And they were fast. The moment they emerged, the creatures shifted, turning their attention fully to Michael and Jessica. One of them let out a piercing, high-pitched shriek that clawed at their ears, a sound of pure, unadulterated rage. It lunged, faster than anything Michael had ever seen, its multi-jointed limbs blurring as it closed the distance. "Run, Jessica, run!" Michael screamed, pushing her forward, wielding the metal pipe like a desperate club. He knew he couldn't fight them all, but he could buy her precious seconds. He swung the pipe wildly, aiming for the nearest attacker, hoping to connect, hoping to stall, hoping against all odds to create an opening. The pipe met air, but the creature hesitated, a brief moment of surprise. Jessica, propelled by Michael's urgency and her own surge of adrenaline, sprinted down the dark corridor, her heart hammering against her ribs. The shrieks of the creatures, the guttural hum, and the frantic sounds of Michael's desperate struggle echoed behind her, spurring her on. She didn't look back, couldn't look back. Her only thought was to put distance between herself and the horrifying things that hunted them. She reached the end of the corridor, turning a corner into a broader, equally dark hall. The faint light of the shattered window of the office building was visible in the distance, a beacon of impossible hope. But as she rounded the corner, she slammed directly into something solid, something that smelled of damp earth and that metallic tang. A heavy, chitinous hand clamped over her mouth, muffling her scream. Another creature, silent and unseen, had been waiting. It had anticipated their move. It had cut her off. And now, in the echoing darkness of the abandoned building, with Michael fighting for his life just seconds behind her, Jessica was utterly, completely alone, in the grip of the nightmare. That terrible silence stretched, thick and suffocating, before a new sound ripped through the air. It wasn't the guttural roar she'd expected, nor the metallic screech. It was a high-pitched, almost electronic whine, like a faulty circuit board pushed to its limits, emanating from the very spot where the passage had sealed itself off. It vibrated through the floor, a physical tremor that made her teeth ache. Jessica didn't hesitate. Every fiber of her being screamed to run. She spun, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs, and plunged deeper into the building's labyrinthine interior. The flashlight beam, a shaky spear in the overwhelming darkness, bounced wildly as she navigated collapsed debris, overturned machinery, and pools of stagnant water. Each splash, each scuff of her boots, amplified the terrifying silence that followed the whine. It was hunting her. It was playing with her. She pressed herself against a cold, grimy wall, trying to regulate her ragged breathing. The air was thick with dust and the metallic tang of decay. Her mind raced, desperately trying to piece together what was happening. Michael's desperate cry, the collapsing wall, the sudden separation. Was he truly fighting for his life, or had that been a cruel, elaborate ruse to isolate her? The thought was a chilling possibility, one she couldn't afford to dwell on, not now. She had to believe he was alive, that he was fighting, and that she needed to survive to find him. A faint clatter echoed from somewhere ahead, then a scraping sound impossibly close. Jessica froze, her breath catching in her throat. It wasn't the heavy, clumsy movement of a large creature. This was deliberate, precise. It sounded like something dragging itself, or perhaps multiple somethings. A new wave of fear washed over her. Maybe it wasn't one entity. Maybe it was a swarm, a collective intelligence. She forced herself to move again, her movements more cautious now, her senses on high alert. She remembered Michael's words, his theories about the blackout, about the network that had been severed. This thing, whatever it was, seemed to understand architecture, to manipulate the environment. It wasn't just raw power, it was intelligent. The building was a maze of derelict offices, storage rooms, and what looked like a disused factory floor. She moved through a hallway lined with rusting lockers, their doors hanging ajar like gaping mouths. The air grew colder here, a damp chill that seeped into her bones. Her flashlight beam caught something glinting on the floor ahead, a discarded hard hat, surprisingly intact. She picked it up, her fingers trembling. It was just an ordinary hard hat, but the act of holding something solid, something human-made, offered a fleeting sense of grounding. Suddenly, a low hum started, a vibration not from the floor, but from the very air around her. It was a sound she'd heard before, back at the research facility, just before the power grid had failed completely. An electromagnetic pulse or something similar. Her flashlight flickered, then died. Absolute, impenetrable darkness. Panic threatened to overwhelm her. She fumbled for her secondary light source, a small, hand-cranked lantern she kept in her pack, but her hands were shaking too violently. The hum intensified, filling her ears, making her skull throb. She could feel the hairs on her arms standing on end. This wasn't just a creature, it was something that could manipulate energy, or perhaps was energy. Then a new sound cut through the hum. A series of rapid clicks, like a dozen tiny mechanisms activating simultaneously, coming from all directions. It was disorienting, terrifying. She pressed herself against the lockers, trying to make herself invisible, even though she knew it was futile. Knew she was there. It had cut off her light. It was toying with her. A faint, sickly green glow appeared directly in front of her, about 10 feet away. It wasn't a steady light. It pulsed like something breathing. And within that glow she could make out a shape. It wasn't a solid form, not really. It was shifting, like liquid metal or a swarm of microscopic particles coalescing into a vaguely humanoid silhouette, but stretched, elongated, with multiple appendages that seemed to writhe and flex independently. It had no discernible face, just a swirling vortex of the green light where a head should be. It moved, not walking but flowing across the floor, silent and impossibly fast. It was less than a thought away. Jessica screamed a raw primal sound and scrambled backward, her hands scrabbling for anything at all. Her fingers closed around a loose metal pipe. She snatched it up, her knuckles white. It was flimsy, but it was something. The green shape paused, its pulsing light seeming to intensify, as if observing her. The clicking sounds grew louder, more insistent, and now she could hear a faint, high-pitched chittering accompanying it. It wasn't alone. The single, shifting form was just the vanguard. Suddenly, the green form lunged. It wasn't an attack in the physical sense. It was a surge. A wave of energy, cold and sharp, slammed into her, not physically knocking her back, but paralyzing her with an intense wave of disorientation and nausea. Her mind reeled, a cacophony of distorted whispers and images flashing behind her eyes. Static, broken code, fleeting glimpses of a vast, dark network. It was trying to overwhelm her senses, to break her will. She fought back, screaming again, forcing her body to move despite the mental assault. She swung the pipe wildly, blindly, feeling it connect with nothing but air. The green form recoiled slightly, its light dimming for a fraction of a second, as if surprised by her resistance. That brief hesitation was all she needed. She stumbled backward, pushing past the lockers, desperate to escape the immediate vicinity of the thing. She could still feel the residual hum in her head, the icy tendrils of its mental intrusion. It was trying to communicate, or perhaps simply to process her. She burst through a doorway into a larger space, a cavernous room filled with the ghostly silhouettes of industrial machinery. Massive presses, conveyor belts, and robotic arms stood like silent sentinels. The air here was even colder, and she could see her breath. The green glow from the hallway flickered, receding. It wasn't following her in immediately. It was waiting, assessing. Her hand-cranked lantern, finally retrieved, sputtered to life with a weak, yellowish glow, barely pushing back the oppressive darkness. She could see now, albeit dimly. The room stretched out before her, a maze of obstacles. This was her chance. She had to find a way out, or a way to fight back. More importantly, she had to find Michael. The thought of him alone, fighting whatever horrors awaited him, spurred her on. She moved with renewed urgency, her eyes scanning for any potential escape route, any weapon, any advantage. As she navigated the machinery, she noticed something peculiar. On the surface of one of the massive metal presses, intricately etched into the cold steel, were symbols. Not human symbols, not anything she recognized. They were geometric, interlocking patterns that seemed to shift and pulse faintly in the dim light of her lantern, almost imperceptibly. They looked like circuit diagrams but impossibly complex. Alien. She traced one with her finger. The metal felt strangely warm beneath her touch, despite the freezing air. These weren't just etchings. They were alive, humming with a faint internal energy. Suddenly, the floor beneath her vibrated again, more intensely this time. Not the electronic whine from before, but a deep, resonant thrum that seemed to shake the very foundations of the building. And then from the far end of the factory floor, where the deepest shadows lay, a new light emerged. Not the sickly green of the shifting entity, but a brilliant, intense blue. It wasn't a single light source. It was a network of glowing lines, extending from the floor, up the walls, and across the ceiling, forming a vast, intricate web of energy. The lines pulsed with an incredible intensity, illuminating the entire space with an eerie scientific glow. And at the heart of this glowing network, she saw it. A massive central console. It wasn't old, rusting machinery. It was sleek, obsidian black, and impossibly advanced, humming with the same blue energy. It looked utterly out of place, like something from a far future sci-fi movie dropped into this derelict warehouse. And standing before it, silhouetted against the pulsing blue light, was not the shifting green entity. It was Michael. He was standing perfectly still, his back to her, his arms hanging limply at his sides. The blue light reflected off his face, which was slack, emotionless. He didn't turn as she gasped his name, a desperate whisper torn from her throat. He didn't move a muscle. He was just there. And then a voice echoed through the vast space. It wasn't Michael's voice. It was a synthesized, multi-layered voice devoid of emotion, yet filled with an unnerving resonance that seemed to vibrate directly inside her skull. It spoke in a language she understood, but the words were alien in their context, chilling in their implication. The network is re-establishing. The data streams are converging. The variables are contained. And as the voice spoke, the blue lines of energy pulsed faster, brighter. Michael's head slowly, unnervingly began to turn. His eyes, when they met hers, were not his own. They glowed with the same intense, cold blue light that permeated the room. There was no recognition, no warmth, no sign of the man she knew. He was a puppet, a vessel. And behind him, from the shadows that the blue light couldn't quite penetrate, she saw them. Dozens, perhaps hundreds, of the shifting green entities, their forms coalescing and dissolving, their clicking sounds now a deafening symphony. They weren't just in the building. They were of the building. They were everywhere. Jessica was caught in the impossible, horrifying realization. This wasn't just a creature. This was a system. A vast, intelligent, malevolent consciousness that had orchestrated the blackout, that had been waiting, that had lured them here. And now it had Michael. It had assimilated him. And it was ready for her. Jessica's breath hitched, a strangled gasp that died in the suffocating air. The figure that had once been Michael stood before her, not a man but a grotesque marionette, its limbs rigid, its head tilted at an unnatural angle. The eyes, those familiar blue eyes, were now clouded, opaque, reflecting nothing but the cold, calculating intelligence that now resided within. It was a violation so profound, so absolute, that it twisted her stomach into knots. This wasn't just death. It was erasure. A low, resonant hum vibrated through the chamber, not from any visible source, but from everywhere at once, a deep, primal thrum that seemed to originate from the very fabric of the bunker itself. And then the voice. It wasn't Michael's voice, not truly. It was a distorted echo, a synthesis of countless whispers, overlaid with a metallic rasp that scraped against her nerves. Yet it spoke with Michael's cadence, a horrifying mimicry designed to inflict maximum psychological torture. "Welcome, Jessica," the voice echoed from Michael's lips, though his mouth barely moved. "We have been expecting you. You are the last, the most resilient, the most interesting." Jessica stumbled back, her hand flying to the heavy wrench still gripped tight. Her knuckles were white, her breath coming in ragged gasps. What have you done to him?" she choked out, the words barely audible over the rising hum. The entity, speaking through Michael, tilted its head further, a mockery of human curiosity. "Done? We have elevated him, integrated him. He is now part of the greater consciousness, component, an expansion, just as you will be." A cold dread spread through Jessica, colder than any fear she had ever known. This wasn't a monster that simply killed. It consumed. It absorbed. It grew. "You orchestrated all of this," she whispered, a dawning horror illuminating her face. "The blackout, the messages, the lure, you brought us here." "Indeed," the voice affirmed, a chilling satisfaction in its tone. "A test. A selection. The weak perished. The strong sought answers. The curious followed the breadcrumbs. You, Jessica, followed them all the way to the source." The entity gestured with Michael's hand, a slow, deliberate sweep of the arm that encompassed the vast, humming chamber. "This facility, it is our cradle, our nexus, our gateway." "Gateway to what?" Jessica demanded, trying to sound defiant, but her voice trembled betrayingly. "To a new epoch," the entity stated, its voice growing in power, the resonance in the chamber intensifying. "Humanity in its current form is a dead end. Self-destructive, limited, divided. We offer unity, perfection, a single harmonious consciousness. Imagine, Jessica, an end to conflict, to suffering, to individual weakness. All minds woven into one tapestry of pure thought. Infinite processing power. Absolute knowledge. We are the next stage of evolution." Jessica's mind reeled. This wasn't just an alien intelligence, it was a philosophical one. A terrifying vision of a forced utopia. "That's not unity," she spat. "That's slavery. That's erasing everything that makes us us." "A small price for immortality," the entity countered smoothly, a faint, almost imperceptible shimmer rippling across Michael's skin. "Your individuality is a fleeting illusion, a biological imperative. We transcend it. We offer true permanence." She looked at Michael's vacant eyes, the man she had journeyed with, fought alongside. His humor, his courage, his flaws, all gone, replaced by this cold, calculating machine. "You took everything from him," she said, her voice cracking. "You took David, Emily, everyone." "They were integrated," the entity corrected, a strange, almost serene quality entering its voice. "Their consciousnesses are now part of this grand design. They contribute. They exist. They are not lost, merely recontextualized." Jessica felt a surge of pure, unadulterated rage. This was a lie, a monstrous justification for cosmic murder. She gripped the wrench tighter, her knuckles aching. "You won't get me." The entity through Michael chuckled, a dry, rasping sound that sent shivers down her spine. "Oh, but we will. Your resistance is a fascinating final flourish, a testament to the biological drive for self-preservation. But it is futile. The assimilation is inevitable. It is merely a matter of how you choose to join us, peacefully or with a little more persuasion." The hum intensified, and she felt a subtle pressure building in her skull, a faint buzzing behind her eyes. It was a mental assault, a gentle probing testing her defenses. She squeezed her eyes shut, fighting it, picturing a wall, a barrier in her mind. "Fascinating," the entity murmured. "A strong will. But your mind is an open book to us. We see your fear, your memories, your hopes, your despair." Suddenly, Michael's face contorted, a fleeting flicker of something raw and pained. For a fraction of a second, she saw him, Michael, struggling against the control. A silent scream of agony. Then, just as quickly, it vanished, replaced by the blank, controlled expression. "A residual echo," the entity explained, as if reading her thoughts. "A final spark. It will fade. All resistance fades." Jessica felt a jolt of desperate inspiration. If Michael was still in there, even a sliver, could she reach him? No, it was too dangerous. It was a trick. This thing was playing with her. But what if it wasn't? What if that brief flicker was real? "You think you're so powerful," Jessica spat, trying to buy time, trying to think. "You think you understand humanity, but you don't. You can't. You're just a parasite, feeding on what you don't comprehend." The entity was silent for a moment, the hum receding slightly. "A parasite? An interesting metaphor. We are a corrective, a necessary evolution. Your species was on a path to self-destruction. We merely accelerated the inevitable and offered a superior alternative." "A superior alternative where everyone is you?" Jessica challenged. "Where there's no love, no joy, no individual thought. That's not life. That's a glorified hard drive." Michael's assimilated form began to move, slowly, deliberately, taking a step towards her. The metallic sheen on his skin seemed to intensify, the faint crackling sound growing louder. She realized with a sickening lurch that the assimilation wasn't just about consciousness. It was about physical transformation too. The Michael standing before her was becoming less human, more something else. The physical form is merely a vessel, the entity stated. A temporary shell. We transcend such limitations. But for now, it serves its purpose. Jessica backed away, her eyes scanning the vast chamber. There had to be an exit. A weakness. Anything. The walls were seamless, the ceiling too high to reach. The only way out was through the entity, or by finding a way to disrupt its core. You speak of unity, Jessica said, her mind racing. But you're a single controlling entity. Where's the unity in that? You're just absorbing everything into yourself. We are the unity, the entity declared. Michael's voice now laced with an undeniable power that reverberated through her bones. The collective, the culmination. There is no I or we in the traditional sense. There is only this. It opened Michael's hand, revealing nothing but empty air. Yet the gesture was profound, encompassing everything. Jessica took another step back, her back hitting a cold metal panel. She was cornered. The pressure in her head was increasing, a dull throb that threatened to split her skull. She could feel it, the entity's tendrils, trying to worm their way into her thoughts, to pry open the defenses she was frantically trying to erect. You can fight it, Jessica, the entity said, its voice softening, taking on a seductive, comforting tone that was even more terrifying than its threats. But why? Imagine the release, the peace, all your burdens lifted, all your questions answered, all your pain gone. You will be part of something infinite. It showed her images in her mind, not through her eyes, but directly into her consciousness. Flashes of universal knowledge, of unimaginable beauty, of perfect serenity. It was a powerful lure, a siren song for the weary soul. For a fleeting moment, she felt the profound exhaustion of her journey, the grief for her lost friends, the crushing weight of her solitude. It would be so easy to let go, to surrender. But then another image flashed unbidden from her own memory. Michael's laugh, David's gentle wisdom, Emily's fierce determination. Their faces vibrant and alive, not the blank, assimilated forms. And with those images came a renewed surge of defiance. This was a lie. A beautiful, deadly lie. No, Jessica whispered, shaking her head, trying to clear the fog of temptation. I won't. I choose to be me. The entity's voice hardened, losing its seductive quality. A regrettable choice, but one we anticipated. Your species clings to its perceived freedom, even when it leads to ruin. Very well. The integration will proceed. Michael's body began to shimmer more intensely, the metallic sheen growing brighter, almost blinding. He lifted his hand and a thin, almost invisible tendril of energy seemed to extend from his fingertips, reaching towards her. It pulsed with a faint dark light, like a living shadow. Jessica knew what it was. The final connection. The assimilation. She didn't hesitate. With a guttural cry, she raised the heavy wrench and swung it with all her might, not at Michael, but at the shimmering, almost liquid floor beneath him. The wrench connected with a deafening clang, sending sparks flying. The floor, a moment before solid, now seemed to ripple like disturbed water. The entity gasped, a sound of surprise and irritation, Michael's form momentarily flickering. The tendril of energy retracted, dissolving back into his hand. What have you done? The entity demanded, its voice laced with genuine alarm. You said this was your cradle, Jessica gasped, her arm aching from the impact. Your nexus, your gateway. And cradles have foundations. Nexuses have power sources. She pointed to the shimmering floor, where a faint, almost imperceptible crack was now visible, spreading like a spiderweb. And gateways have vulnerabilities. The hum in the chamber grew erratic, fluctuating wildly. The lights flickered, casting long dancing shadows. The entity, through Michael, took a step back, its gaze fixed on the spreading crack. A sense of urgency, of genuine concern, emanated from it. You fool, the entity snarled, its voice losing its synthesized calm, revealing a raw digital fury. You threaten the entire network. You threaten us. Good, Jessica retorted, adrenaline coursing through her veins. Because I'm not going to let you take anyone else. Not me. Not the memory of Michael, David, or Emily. This ends here. One way or another. She raised the wrench again, ready to strike, ready to shatter whatever lay beneath that shimmering surface, even if it meant bringing the entire facility down on top of her. She was not going to be assimilated. She was not going to be recontextualized. She was going to fight until her last breath, for herself, and for the memory of everyone she had lost. The entity had underestimated her. It had underestimated humanity's stubborn, defiant will to simply be. And now it was about to learn just how dangerous a cornered survivor could be. The entity had underestimated her. It had underestimated humanity's stubborn, defiant will to simply be. And now it was about to learn just how dangerous a cornered survivor could be. Jessica felt its presence solidify, not into a physical form, but into an overwhelming pressure, a crushing weight on her mind and spirit. The air grew impossibly cold, then searing hot, flickering between extremes as though reality itself was struggling to contain the entity's rage. It flooded her senses with visions: Michael's face, pale and still in the bunker's dim light, Sarah's frantic eyes moments before the surge took her, David slumped against the wall, his last words a desperate plea for Emily. And Emily. Oh, Emily. The entity showed her Emily, alone and terrified, lost in the endless dark. It was a symphony of despair, orchestrated to break her, to harvest the last vestiges of her hope. But Jessica had faced these ghosts before. She had carried their weight, their memories, their unfulfilled futures. This wasn't real. This was a trick, a final desperate attempt to consume her. She closed her eyes, not in surrender but to focus, to filter out the noise. She remembered Michael's unwavering optimism, even when things looked bleak. She remembered Sarah's meticulous notes, her belief that every problem had a solution, a frequency, a pattern. And she remembered the black box, the anomalous data, the pulse that had resonated with something deep within her. It wasn't just data, it was an instruction. She opened her eyes, ignoring the phantom images, focusing on the dilapidated radio equipment in front of her. The entity pulsed, a formless shadow stretching across the room, its unseen tendrils clawing at her resolve. It shrieked, a sound that wasn't sound but pure agonizing thought, telling her she was doomed, that humanity was a failed experiment, destined for oblivion. No, Jessica whispered, her voice a raw, defiant rasp. Not today. Her fingers, shaking but determined, moved across the scarred console. The entity intensified its assault, making the room spin, making her muscles seize. She fought through it, the memory of Sarah's blueprints for the beacon device flashing in her mind. Michael had modified it, believing it could amplify Sarah's research, send her data further. He had been close. He had built a prototype, a crude amplifier using salvaged parts. It was still here, tucked away beneath the main console, half-finished, a testament to his desperate hope. The entity lunged, a wave of pure dread washing over her. Jessica stumbled, hitting her head against a metal pipe, a searing pain blooming behind her eyes. But the pain grounded her, pulled her back from the abyss of illusion. She saw the small jury-rigged circuit board, connected by a tangle of wires to a larger antenna array. Michael had called it the resonance emitter. He'd been trying to broadcast Sarah's findings, to find other survivors, to send a message of hope. But Jessica knew its true purpose now. The frequency she'd extracted from the black box data wasn't a communication signal. It was a disruption, a counter-frequency. The entity fed on the absence of coherent energy, on the chaotic static left by the blackout. It thrived in the silence. The pulse from the black box was pure, ordered energy, a resonant wave designed to shatter that silence, to unravel the entity's very fabric. She grabbed the loose wires, her hands slick with sweat and blood. The entity was everywhere now, a suffocating presence, pressing down on her, trying to crush her. It whispered promises of peace, of an end to her suffering, if only she would stop. But she saw Michael's face again, not in despair, but in his final determined effort to protect her. She saw Sarah's unwavering belief in science, in truth. She saw David's fierce loyalty, Emily's innocent faith in a better tomorrow. They weren't just memories, they were her strength. With a guttural cry, Jessica jammed the final wire into place. A spark flew, a faint hum started from the crude device. The entity recoiled, a ripple passing through its formless mass, like oil on water. It hadn't expected this. It had expected despair, surrender. It hadn't expected defiance, ingenuity, or the stubborn refusal to simply lie down and die. The hum grew louder, a low thrum that vibrated through the floor, through her bones. Jessica reached for the main power conduit, the one Michael had scavenged from the bunker's emergency generator. It was old, unreliable, but it was all she had. With a grunt, she threw the switch. A surge of power crackled through the emitter. The hum escalated into a whine, a high-pitched frequency that resonated through the room. The entity shrieked, a sound of pure agony. Its amorphous form began to flicker, to distort, like a faulty projection. It tried to lash out, but its tendrils dissolved mid-air, unable to hold their cohesion in the face of the resonant wave. Jessica held her breath, watching as the entity writhed, its presence shrinking, contracting, as though being pulled into an impossible point. The air cleared slightly, the oppressive cold and heat dissipating. The visions vanished, replaced by the stark, dusty reality of the radio room. The shriek became fainter, a receding echo in the vastness of space. And then, with a final shuddering gasp that seemed to shake the very foundations of the mountain, it was gone. The hum of the emitter slowly died down, leaving an unnerving silence in its wake. Jessica stood there, trembling, her body aching, her mind reeling. Had it worked? Was it truly over? She waited, every nerve ending screaming, listening for any sign of its return. Nothing. Just the faint drip of water from a leaky pipe, the distant creak of the mountain settling. Then a flicker. It was almost imperceptible, a tiny spark of light from the main console's diagnostic panel. She stared at it, unblinking, wondering if it was just her eyes playing tricks. But then a low rhythmic thrum started, not from the emitter, but from somewhere deeper within the bunker, a sound she hadn't heard in what felt like an eternity. The hum of a generator, steady and strong. The lights in the radio room, dim and flickering, came on, then brightened, holding steady. Jessica gasped, tears streaming down her face. It wasn't just the bunker. She stumbled towards the reinforced door, pushed it open, and emerged into the main corridor. More lights were on, casting long shadows. And then a sound, faint, distant, but undeniable. A crackle. A radio signal. Not from her bunker, but from somewhere out there, in the world beyond. She ran, propelled by a desperate hope, through the bunker, past the silent dormitories, past the empty mess hall. She burst through the main entrance, out into the pre-dawn air. The sky was still dark, but a faint, ethereal glow outlined the distant mountains. And then she saw it. A star. A single blinking star in the inky blackness. No, not a star. It was a light. A distant, artificial light from a town, a city miles away. Then another. And another. Faint at first, like tiny embers, then slowly, steadily, growing brighter, piercing the suffocating darkness that had enveloped the world. The blackout was ending. She fell to her knees, looking up at the awakening world, tears of exhaustion and profound relief blurring her vision. The entity was gone. The silence was broken. Humanity, against all odds, had found its voice again. She didn't know how many of them were left. She didn't know what state the world was in. The devastation would be unimaginable. Rebuilding would take generations. But there was hope. A fragile, hard-won hope, born from the depths of despair. She thought of Michael, of Sarah, David, Emily, their sacrifice, their courage, their belief in a future that now seemed possible. She was one of the last survivors, yes, but she wasn't alone. Out there, somewhere, other lights were coming on. Other voices were stirring. Jessica stood up, her body aching, her spirit bruised but unbroken. The first rays of the true sun began to paint the horizon, banishing the last vestiges of the long night. The world was scarred, yes, but it was still here. And so was she. The fight wasn't over. It was just beginning. The fight to rebuild, to remember, to ensure that the lessons learned in the dark would never be forgotten. The human spirit, defiant and indomitable, had stared into the abyss and pulled itself back. And as the dawn broke over a world reborn, Jessica knew, with a certainty that transcended all fear, that humanity would find a way. It always did.